we've considered and settled on the lease of assets, 50-year leases with 49-year options. Queenslanders retain the ownership of those assets, but they lease them out for a price for the next 50 years with a 49-year option. That frees up money. We can pay down $25 billion worth of debt. We can put $8.6 billion into job-creating infrastructure, creating up to 25,000 jobs, and we can afford to pay $3.4 billion into a cost of living fund to give Queenslanders about $577 relief on their power bills over the next 5 years.
Now, clearly our plan, central to that plan, is not selling those assets and making sure that they are retained in public hands for the long term. Now, those assets that we are talking about, the LNP selling off, $2 billion worth in terms of revenue returns each and every year. That's $2 billion year in, year out that we want to see stay in public hands so that we can use those dividends for a range of...
Let's correct a few things.
You can correct him in a moment. Let him outline his case, please. Let's give him an opportunity to outline his case.
And in 2012-13, they only made $1.02 billion. So, let's get the facts right. What we'll be doing is leasing those assets. We'll be getting those assets back at the end of the term. So
those conditions will be made public to people before the end of the election?
Like any lease, what you lease, you get back at the end of the term, because this isn't a sale. Unlike Labor,
sure, I get that, and I understand that, and you outlined that initially.
So at the end of the term,
so the assets are leased. So let's leave it.
Correct.
You get the assets back at the end. You get the assets back.
Correct.
Back, but in terms of the specific question, because over 99 years, you're going to have to expect that those assets are going to have some improvements done to them.
Sure.
So if the private company,
they're going to have renewal and investment in new things to make sure they stay up to date and that type of thing.
So the private company spends money doing that. What happens at the end of the lease to that specific private investment improvement?
Those things come back to the state of Queensland at the end of the lease, because
at no extra cost.
Because what happens is when people put that investment in, they do it and they get their return through the fee or price that they charge over the duration of the term. So at the moment, the Australian Energy Regulator sets the return that those companies can receive, and that will continue whether it's owned by the government or whether it's owned by private sector.
Hang on, Curtis, I need to ask this specific question.
So they'll get their return, and the assets come back to the people of Queensland under the terms of the lease at the end of the lease term.
So those assets, the improvements, specifically we're talking about any improvements to those assets made by the private companies.
Yep.
What happens to those? So we have to, do we as taxpayers, does the government in 99 years' time have to pay for those assets to buy them back?
Well, in the normal case, you would expect that they would be paid off over the time. So you make an investment, say, over 10 or 15 years, the life of something, and you depreciate it over that period of time, and at the end of the lease, that asset comes back to the state of Queensland.
With the improvements at no extra cost.
With the improvements back to us. So that's the normal course of events.
That's not what the model in South Australia says. The model in South Australia, which has been talked about before, and this is where you refer to
by the Labor government.
This is where the Treasurer has referred to these assets coming back at a negotiated price, I think were his words. Now, at that negotiated price, if we're selling them at tens of billion dollars,
my words were.
We're talking about $10 billion now in today's money. What is this going to mean in 100 years' time? This is going to mean tens of billions of dollars, Patrick, that we would have to pay as taxpayers to bring back these to the public purse.